You'll know when you have a wild woman. She'll practice her craft without boundaries. She is truly autonomous. Her loyalty is only to the family she serves, a midwife who will not allow herself to be held back by a system she didn't create.
This podcast is for the birth keepers who want to grow and change. We are open to learning through self-reflection and supportive community. We are creating this space to explore without judgment. We are remembering we were
Born wild.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Born Wild podcast. We're your hosts, Clover,
Sophia,
And Emma.
and today we're interviewing Ellah Ray. So I'll just pass it over to her and she can introduce herself.
Hi, you guys. Nice to be here. My name is Ellah Ray. I live in the Bay Area, California, and I'm a midwife. I've been a midwife here for the past 15 years. And yeah, just like in it. Right now I'm on a sabbatical and just exploring a lot within midwifery, within the birth world, within teaching and mentorship, and yeah, happy to get into all of it with you.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you.
so where did your journey start for you in terms of being interested in birth?
Okay. Let's see. I'd say that my story really begins with my own pregnancy. I was living off-grid and homesteading on a tiny island in the Pacific Northwest in Canada. And I knew I wanted a home birth, and it was just simple like that. And I met a couple of midwives, but nobody really felt right. It seemed that they were all afraid of birth and pretending that they weren't. They all said the right things. They were really effusive with your body knows just what to do. When women have been giving birth forever, birth is, the most natural thing in the world. But their actual plan was for me to kind of be managed and likely transferred to a hospital. So I didn't choose them as my midwives, and I began to really sense something's up. There's this split in views about childbirth. And at around 35 weeks, I met a midwife. Her name is Ellah Ray, and she's a traditional midwife and teacher in Vancouver. And it was one of those life-defining moments. Gloria was hosting a water birth slideshow, which turned out to be an opportunity for one woman after another to talk about how desperate they were to heal from their invasive and violating birth experiences, both in the hospital and with midwives at home. Even decades after giving birth, they were haunted. And Gloria held space for them to talk about everything. And it seemed as if this was the first time these women felt heard and validated. And that's when I really first understood that how we give birth matters. It matters for the rest of our lives for some women. And I also knew in that moment that this was not going to be me. I wasn't going to give my body and my baby over to the authorities to be managed. So it turns out that Gloria's partner, Mary Sullivan, was able to come to my little island and support me as needed. And the day after she arrived, I gave birth. And it was an ecstatic experience. And I felt just this undeniable call to offer the same thing to other women. To hold space for women to get this rite of passage in their full and glorious power. And yeah, it was sort of one of those experiences where like I knew with every fiber of my being that if women and babies got this, we would collectively heal. So that was like the very, very beginning. And for the next few years, a couple times, like maybe once a month or something, I would go to the city and sit in on Gloria LeMay's classes and sometimes attend births with them. And at this time, friends started inviting me to their births, and there was no professional in the room. And my role was really like simple and pure and kind of, you know, naive, very much beginner's mind. I did dishes, I held siblings, passed a cool cloth as needed. Yeah, just like beamed love and confidence at the mother. It was quite sweet. And then at some point along the way, there was like this really clear shift where I started being asked to the births more as a midwife and like the one in the room who knew the most. And the big shift, the actual big shift was internally, I got scared and I felt that I needed, you know, a bigger skill set to fulfill this role and not be an imposter and not, yeah. So yeah, I've reflected on this time a lot recently, and it makes sense. You know, I wanted to feel confident and competent, and I didn't want to feel in over my head. But I think that the fear went at its core was that I started believing that life and death was up to me, that it was like in my hands. And yeah, so at the time I was probably 31, I self-imposed this expectation, this impossible expectation that, yeah, that was just like too much of a burden to bear, actually. And it was joyless and so quite sad. So then I decided like, oh, I need to get trained up in order to, you know, if life and death is in my hands, I needed to, yeah, get trained. And so I started training at one of the birthing centers in Texas, but yeah, women from Central America would cross over into the US to have their babies in the US. And they would do this in labor. And then students would pay the birth center to practice their skills on these women. And I only lasted 2 days because the whole situation, I found it quite inhumane. Yeah, they would, so the midwifery students would check off their skills, their skills set checklist from their midwifery school. And sometimes there was a line of like 6 students who one after the other did their practice skills on these women. It was often like clumsy and hurried, and yeah, it felt horrific. It felt really racist and classist and misogynistic, and yeah, it felt like gang rape. So I left there really quickly. And then back in Canada, by then midwifery legislation in British Columbia had shifted, and it now was legal. And it went from, and it used to be illegal, neither legal or illegal. And what I kept hearing from the midwives who were grandmothered in was that they were satisfied by making good money, finally. But they also acknowledged that they were no longer really practicing authentic midwifery. Their job was more like, you know, a decently paid nurse or obstetrician. So they shifted from supporting women in this rite of passage in physiological wellness, woman-centered process to the industrial birth model. So at this point, I just left midwifery for years. I was a dancer and had a clothing company and was homesteading and raising my daughter. And then fast forward a bunch of years, and it's time to leave this, earthy, homesteady life and like choose a vocation, really do a deep dive with something where I will make money, I will gain credibility, I will not be financially struggling anymore. So my daughter and I moved to the Bay Area, and I started an apprenticeship and got licensed.
What school did you get licensed through?
NMI, National Midwifery Institute. And I had a practice. Then I worked solo in partnerships. I trained students and fully immersed myself in the world of the busy home birth urban midwife. And I loved almost everything about the job. I speak in past tense because I've made some really huge shifts in the past couple years. But for years, I practiced in my own way. I followed my conscience, and I knew how to hold a container of love and reverence and witness. And I knew how to not disturb physiological birth while, being a watchful presence. I loved the intimacy with the women. I loved the families I worked with. I loved my small fringe cohort of like-minded midwives. I love how real and dedicated women and partnerships get when babies are on their way. So often, as you know, families just tap into this sincere longing to be vulnerable and to grow. It's a beautiful space to be in with families and women. And I loved being financially stable. That was nice. And there was also this, kind of shadowy aspect that was nagging, and that I didn't, really address for a long while. And it's actually a place where I kind of abandoned myself. It was, one way to describe it is like it was living in this kind of like it's a state of hyper alertness, ready to jump in and save lives. And at one point, a partner gave me a superhero cape, not as a joke. There was no irony there. But this superhero state, this urgency and this ready to rescue, the need to rescue, is pretty typical for many licensed midwives, at least, in the Bay Area. And there was this sense and reality that the medical board and the larger midwifery community are kind of like looking over your shoulder and like ready to pounce. So because there's this like real fear of being hurt, I lived a lot under the radar, with secrecy and coded language and covering my tracks and scripted my charts and stuff like that. And didn't expose any of this to the clients. So there was like this dual split thing. And it wasn't the client's business to know kind of my experience of being a midwife. This was my cross to bear, so to speak. Like I wanted to hold a container for them that's free of the shadowy aspects of my job. And I think that like being that buffer took a fair bit of energy, and as conscientious and responsible as I tried to be, I'm sure it spilled out in some ways energetically into my work with women. Yeah. But personally, I felt like it just became unsustainable to keep doing that. And I think that that's something that is a difficulty in the profession. Yeah, at one point I remember like being in a room full of midwives and looking around at the elders, and they didn't seem vibrant to me. They didn't seem well. And I started developing, my own health issues. And yeah, so in the spring of 2019, I planned to just quit midwifery.
So how long had you been a licensed midwife at that point?
14 years. Or my license probably 12 years and 2 years in the student part. So at that point, I heard a podcast with Emily Saldea and talking about free birth, and then just got introduced to Yolanda Norris Clark and the free birth movement, and yeah, just got learned about this like upswelling of women who are truly and actually claiming their bodies, their babies, their births as their own. And yeah, I was so inspired and emboldened, and finding these teachers and these community leaders was huge. So then that really opened up at long last, this like deep reckoning, this deep and intimate sort of internal deep dive. Questions like around like life and death and safety and risk and responsibility and true authority and fear and social banishment and financial capability. And yeah, like what does it actually mean to trust birth and to believe in women?
I'm curious what your practice was like. And then like what from that podcast did you learn, or what were you already doing? For example, like vaginal exams. Had you already turned away from vaginal exams and were like, these are not actually helpful, or were you actually doing vaginal exams? And that's just one example. Like what
What did your practice look like?
Yeah, like what from the podcast were you like? Because I know I listened and my mind was open to a lot of things that I didn't even realize. Like I thought they were necessary,
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious where you were before finding the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't find the free birth podcast until later. This was like an interview that Emily did, and I think it was with Katya from Honey Talks. Yeah. I think that's what it was, but I can't be sure. I mean, because after that initial interview, I just like wanted to hear everything that Emily and Yolanda had to say. So no, I remember it when I was meeting Gloria LeMay when I was pregnant. The reason that I had so much confidence in her instantly was because she said something like, I'm on the other side of the room when women are giving birth, and so the idea, and I didn't have any exams during my labor, and it always looked like learning with the, in the apprenticeship, just really for the midwife. It never felt like it was for the woman giving birth. And my priority was always to center the woman giving birth, and not, so no, I would often never do a vaginal exam. So I was already there. It wasn't like I was practicing, fully in the medical model, but it was always in the room. And I find that when the medical paradigm, when that lens is in the room, it triumphs. Like it becomes the true authority. it's all fine and well to tell women and to be in support of women trusting their bodies. But if that medical equipment is right there at the ready, it's also signaling simultaneously this other message, which is and that's the thing. It's like, I don't know. I personally haven't found a way to easily hold both of these paradigms at the same time. And so eventually I just started leaving my medical equipment out of the room, and then in the car, and then at home, and then I gave it away. And the way that I would like, because I think medical emergencies are real. It's not a made up thing. I feel like a medical support can be brought in as needed, but it became joyless for me to really hold a woman in her power and be like, well, let's just check just in case. It's kind of like, I remember like doing, for a long while, in the last many years of my practice, prenatal appointments were all, would take place in the woods. We'd go for walks, or we'd do yoga together, or we'd meditate. But the whole point of the prenatal appointments was to build rapport, to gain trust, to get to know each other, so that a stranger wasn't walking into the birth room. But also to really support and facilitate the woman gaining a deep and true access to her inner guides, her inner knowing. And so we would do this beautiful work together in the prenatal appointments. And then I would be like, shall we take your blood pressure? So it was sort of like, what's going on there? Like, I had a checklist that was like in the background. And of course I want to offer it, because I want her to know, what do I want her to know? Anyway, it just became, so as soon as that, so I take her blood pressure and it was within a normal range, and I would say, yep, you are really healthy, just as you know. Or like, it just became like, what are we doing? What are we agreeing to? Is this just a charade? Or is this just like, it just became like this obligatory thing that was like undermining actually the real work that we were doing, which is acknowledging. And this, I think, is like the essential difference between the authentic midwife or birth keeper and the medical midwife. We are working to fully acknowledge that the only one actually having the experience is the woman herself. And so, of course, we center her as the authority of her own experience. But as soon as like that stethoscope came out, it was like, oh no, that was just like a groovy little exercise we were doing. This is the real authority of your health and wellness. And so I think that the same can be said with cervical checks, or, I remember being the midwife and I'm like, God, I want to know, is she dilated, or is she just still at 1 centimeter maybe, or, and thinking in these ways, and how that would take me away from really my role, which my desired role, the role that I told the woman I was in, which was to be a loving witness and saying, I see you, I am here with you. I believe in you and your contact with your experience. And yeah,
I was gonna say, I loved hearing you say how eventually I started leaving my equipment out of the door, and then I started leaving it in the car, and then I left it at home, and then I got rid of it.
Totally.
I'm curious, along that road, was there ever a point where you've had experiences where you're like, oh, it would have been really helpful, like this could have maybe kept somebody home if we had had access to XYZ, or did that just never show up for you?
No, I know what you mean. And I think that part of what I want to offer as a midwife is like, I mean, if the woman wants this, is like, you stay at home, you get to do this at home, and we can set up a mini medical situation. And there are a ton of like little tips and tricks, like offering a catheter, or sometimes even an IV, or suturing can happen at home. And so there's definitely like a medical skill set that's nice when you just have it at home rather than transferring to the hospital. I mean, transferring to the hospital is an ordeal. And I would think that, like that it should happen if it's life and death, and not these pretty minor interventions or offerings. And so for those kinds of situations, and yes, they did arise, I would, usually they're not emergencies. Usually it's it can be a conversation, and there's time to figure out what's wanted. But in my ideal world, then the medical midwife would be called in as needed. But there was no need for a medical lens to be viewing and perceiving and measuring and monitoring all through a non-medical event. And so, if the woman's objective is to stay out of the hospital and for everyone to be living as much, if we can even, I mean, that's not a promise anybody can make, of course, but then I think that there are medical midwives that can be called in. But for me personally, to do both at the same time was this fundamental contradiction. And I would be a medical, like I'm on call, I can be on call as the medical midwife to come in and to offer the catheter or to suture or to, like I have those skills. And that's kind of ideally how I would like to practice, but to not hold both at the same time, if that makes sense.
You and I have talked a lot about this,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the line I'm trying to hold.
Yeah.
I get hired as a licensed midwife by some families, and other families hire me as a radical birth keeper,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to find the balance between offering both to families, and it's not seamless. And I'm grateful to know you to brainstorm off of and
Mm-hmm.
give birth debriefs with. You were gonna ask a question.
Oh yeah, I was curious, Ella, because like when you were talking about your own birth experience on the island, like just I felt like the context was important, that like the island, there weren't people birthing on the island before. Like that wasn't really happening. It was not somewhere where you could access with a car ferry. Like it was very remote. So like there was like, you started from a place of such intense trust of birth, and then you kind of speak to that journey and that arc of moving to that place where you're like, okay, I'm holding life and death, and thus I need these skills. And then it seems like the arc goes down again, like if it's like a bell curve. And so I'm curious, like where in that process of like deciding that you were going to get licensed, doing an apprenticeship, starting to practice again, like were there moments where you were like, oh wait, I'm not where I want to be, this is not what I really want to be doing, and how you kind of figured that out from being a student then becoming a midwife, and now transitioning somewhat out of like licensed midwifery and into something else.
Like where does the curve go down?
Yeah, no, during the student time, I knew that it was going to really be challenging, and that I would be witnessing and even required to like show skills in these things that I didn't necessarily believe in, but I also, it was really important to me to become financially stable. And if that weren't in the picture, oh, and the other thing that became really important to me was like to know what I was talking about, like to have a leg to stand on when I was speaking my deepest passion about what's possible in pregnancy, birth, and postpartum and motherhood. And so it was kind of like going inside the belly of the beast in order to know it or something. But I think that I did get caught up in the whole vibe and, like of community and like processing traumatic births. And, like there was like this importance, like self-importance, and being recognized all over town as the midwife. And, couldn't go to a farmer's market without running into a bunch of clients who would like hold me on a pedestal that was like both embarrassing and then also like, okay, I want to meet this moment and like honor that, yes, I'm a midwife. But like, it was felt out of balance. Like it didn't feel like it is holy work, but I've never wanted to be in the life-saving dun dun dun, here I am role. And it always felt like a contradiction. Like we come to a birth as a medical midwife with bags, and we set up a whole, station, right? A whole like resuscitation and hemorrhage, and like the station for all of the emergencies is at the ready. And sometimes, like cover it with a pretty cloth, but there it is in the room. And how can that not like there it is in the room? How can that not like see doubt and anxiety and the need for those external, I don't know. It's a kind of like how these different paradigms are at odds, how they don't live together. And so I think, Clover, for me, I just got to pause and be like, what do I want? Like, why am I here? And what are my deeper values? What do I really know? What do I want to stand with? What's truest, for me? How do I be in most integrity? And so, yeah, there came a pause, and maybe that pause was able to happen because I was financially secure for the first time in my life. And yeah.
It makes me think of how like hypocritical we can be as licensed midwives, because when you were describing the pretty cloth covering the resuscitation station, it made me think of the in-hospital birth centers, how it's like, oh, it's a birth center, but really it's a hospital room with like pictures covering things and like, prettiness. It's just like pretty to over. And how like easy that is for me to say. And then I am draping, the pretty cloths over my equipment.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like, Ella, I met you in a really interesting part of my midwifery journey where I was, I had started midwifery school. I started listening to the Free Birth Society podcast, and I kind of got to this place where I was like, who is the midwife? Is this like an outdated, is this necessary? am I moving into a role that I actually don't want to inhabit? Is there a good and just and like, is there a way to inhabit that role that can be in integrity with what I actually believe about birth? And I feel like I'm still really actively in that process, but knowing you and kind of being able to process through birth that I was doing at the birth center, and kind of untangling all the pieces, because there were parts of the Free Birth Society that felt really resonant, or like just the concept of free birth or unassisted birth felt really resonant, and then other parts where I was, I think, tied into that piece of like life and death. It's on me. And so, yeah, I'm just curious, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about what you're doing now, but where do you feel like the role of what is the role of the midwife? Is that still relevant? Like, how do we, as a group of women who are trying to kind of interrogate these beliefs, where do we land?
You know, I love talking with you about this, Clover. I mean, you know, we can have, there's two conversations. Like, one is the theoretical and the philosophical, and the you know, like the really like understanding the paradigms, and then there's the, like, what feels good to you, you know, like what. So that's my question for myself, is like, I am so interested in joy and wellness, and that is only I can answer that for myself, you know. Like, who am I? What do I choose when I'm not, when I'm centering that? And I don't choose to set up a resuscitation center and a hemorrhage center, and, you know, in the sacred space of a woman's birth. Like, that doesn't feel good to me. And that work is is part of the work that I'm, you know, super interested in. And I love the theoretical conversations as well. But I don't think that I can know what's right for somebody else, especially if I skip over the part of knowing what's right for myself. And what brings joy? What feel like, if something is niggling, then it's like, oh, there's something to look at, you know, what brings joy? And it's a question with levity. Another question, another way of approaching this is like, where do I feel in integrity? And that's I get to a more sort of serious place there. But when I contact, like, what's fun, what's joyful, what feels like a beautiful life to live, what feels like a beautiful exchange with this woman who I'm walking with, who I'm working with, and to orient there. Yeah
That's really helpful.
Yeah. I, you know, do that toy back and forth between, you know, radical birth keeper and licensed midwife, and it obviously depends on the clientele that hires me to and what they've hired me as. But reflecting on like not even using something, but setting something up in case you need it. But that's something that I have never chatted with families about. Like, do you want me to bring my equipment with me? Do you want me to bring it inside? Do you want me to set it up? Like, are there certain things you do want me to set up, or just like, no, just show up, like, as you? That those conversations are not necessarily ones I'm having with families that I'd love to start having. Yeah, all the way down to like those details, like, so that she can create the birth space that she wants and makes her feel safe.
Yeah, because it kind of feels like I used to have this really strong sense that there was a midwife for everyone, and in some ways I still believe that, and in other ways I feel like, you know, this is such a complex topic that we're so immersed in. We're always having these dialogues, and to expect that like a family could know all the different choices that they actually have, it's like there's a veil that we could lift that's like, instead of just being like, this is what home birth is, taking away pieces or adding in pieces and truly letting it be up to the family. It's such a different thing because, you would think that someone might have some concept that they could birth completely on their own with nothing in the room. And when you talk to like a regular person on the street about that, it's the most shocking, scary, like upsetting idea.
Well, it never would have crossed my mind. And I entered the birth world before I had children too. So I don't know if there's a difference there. But it never crossed my mind that you would do anything other than just go to the hospital and have a beautiful experience and have a baby. Like there was nothing else. I've been learning and then like learning about midwifery and how radical that was for me. And then like unlearning all the midwifery stuff. It's like, whoa, like how far does this actually go?
Totally. And what is our responsibility if that's knowledge that we feel like we have access to? What is our responsibility to women to like not just assume that because they hired a licensed midwife means that they want all the things that a licensed midwife usually does if they have no concept for other options.
Yeah, we do a lot of storytelling in my practice of sharing about birth experiences that others have had, because I feel like that if all you've known is one thing, but then you hear like, oh, this woman did it this way and this woman did it this way, you start to be like, oh, you mean she just like labored and had her baby? And I always thought I would need to be told when to push, or all these things. You just start breaking it down, but like letting them come to their own conclusions. That's why the podcasts are so amazing, when women are sharing their stories, because you could just hear over and over again, she did.
Yeah, stories are huge, aren't they? Like it just creates a whole other universe of understanding. It's true. Most people aren't, they're interested in making a family. They're not necessarily interested in the minutia and the details of the birth experience. Like that's something that midwives and birth keepers love, and it's not everybody's thing. So to become experts, like they don't need to become. I think that what families, and often they don't know what they're choosing when they're choosing something. I find that is so true. So many people like, oh yeah, I'm going to have a hospital birth, and they're not going to, they know that I don't want vitamin K for my newborn unless there's bruising, and they said that they won't cut the cord, and they know that I want to hold my baby, like just basic things like that. And then of course, maybe they'll get to do that for a second, or their wishes will be honored, like a whiff of their wishes will be honored, but
unless it's meconium.
unless it's set, like fill in the blanks. Yeah. So, and the same is true for, the home birth midwife. I think that a lot of people don't know what they're choosing, and often they choose like a birth center to have like supposedly the best of both worlds, which is a whole thing to unpack,
Like we have a client right now who's had home births with another midwife, and now we're supporting her. And there's been during the interview process, there was a lot of questions about like, I always have to have my cervix, like I always get an interior lip and have to have my cervix pushed back, and just like making sure that I would know how to do that, and that's not the time for me to be like, that's not necessary. It's the time for me to be like, yeah, if that's necessary, like we can make that happen. And then have the prenatal care to like slowly, introduce her to the idea that actually might not be necessary. But trying to like meet families where they're at, and then like slowly open their minds up to the possibilities of what birth can actually.
Well, maybe that's your magic as a midwife. I feel like for me, it starts in the interview. It's like if in the most fundamental question of like, do you want to access internally for your sense of wellness, or do you want to access externally? And it's sort of like in that calling for the woman. And if she, because there's a lot of work to do for many women to really gain deep access to her inner knowing. It's not just like a thing to choose. I mean, for some people it is, but sometimes there's a lot in the way, and it's a whole process. And I personally didn't find it like satisfying to sort of coax anybody into a more into their internal gaze and away from the external like that. But I love it when midwives can do that. There's a doula that I worked with a lot who was brilliant at doing that. Like, she would slowly coax over the course of the relationship these people planning C-sections to have home births, with kind of fringy midwives. And I was like, how do you do that? And that's not my superpower, but it sounds like that is something you are developing or already have developed, Sophia. And that's beautiful.
I was able to watch a mom who hired me in labor. I did the whole process with her. She's probably listening. I did the whole process with her while she was in labor. She was going to be at a birth center and hired me in labor. And there was like, are you sure you don't have to check me? Like all those things. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure I don't have to, And then she just labored and had her baby. And she was like, that just happened, and she just did it again for the second time with us. Yeah. And I can see the benefit of too in an interview, just being like, that's actually not necessary, and just being like blunt and honest with somebody, like, oh yeah, like if you have a cervical lip, that just means you're not ready to push your baby out. Like you're just in labor, Yeah. So I can see like going both ways with it and how that can serve, different women.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Where
So
are
it's
you at
again,
right-
what's that?
Where are you at right now? Because I know you're taking a sabbatical, your mind got opened up to free birth, you had mentioned. You're not doing licensed midwifery right now?
Free birth is a wonderful thing for everyone, anyone that feels called to it. And I'm so happy that there's all of these resources available for that. But I don't think that a birth keeper or a midwife has a place at a free birth, right? It's kind of a little bit of an oxymoron there. But the primary thing that I'm doing is, I'm still doing a lot of like prenatal and postpartum work with women. The big break that I'm taking is from being on call. And I'm going to be traveling a lot this summer and just being out of the city and deep in nature, camping by the ocean, in an orchard, and helping my daughter build a little house that she's been working on, and working. And the thing that I'm most excited about and curious about is I'm offering groups for midwives and students and just people in the birth profession, doulas, nurses, who are asking these questions, who want to be in a deep conversation about like, how do I honor myself and show up for my work? And when these two things don't necessarily mesh well, so they're grappling. And I love to be in that grappling conversation and I find that doing that in community is really powerful. So I offer, groups. it's new. I've been doing this for a few months, and I've run a couple groups. The first one was a 6-week in-person group, and then the second one was a shorter online Zoom group. And as it goes, I want to be able to figure out, doing that on Zoom a little bit more, so that people from different places can be involved. And it's been really fun. And not just fun, but like really, really useful, and feels like an important thing to really address this deep disillusionment that a lot of women working with birth feel. And rather than quit, to really examine. And
Yeah, we want the people who are asking the questions. We don't want those people to leave.
Yeah,
To keep asking the questions.
Yeah.
exactly. Totally.
And that's what this space is for. That was our hope, is that if nobody ever asked the question, and there's a lot of people out there who like didn't even know it was a question to ask, until somebody else asked it, and they went, oh, like even you just bringing up the setting up all the equipment, I had never even thought about not doing that. It never crossed my mind, so there's always room to like keep breaking it down.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Wow, Ellah, you're such a captivating conversationalist. Your voice is just like
so
soothing.
I was like, do you do any like guided meditations?
I know.
Yeah, I
and
was
like the
that.
words that you choose, I'm like, wow, you're just so beautiful to talk to.
Well, do you have any social media platforms or any websites where people wanted to reach out to you, they could find you at?
Yeah, my website is Ellah with an H at the end, ray.com, ELLAH, Ray, RAY.com. And I'm on Instagram, barely, but working on that. Anybody know of any social media whizzes that,
I do.
You do? Okay.
Yeah. We have somebody doing our social media.
Okay, maybe I'll get their info from you.
Yes, great. Well, we've got a couple follow-up questions that we'd like to ask you.
Okay.
Do you want to go with the first one, Emma?
Yeah, and I also have I feel like we should end with a more important question. So
Oh.
these are kind of silly.
Okay.
But if your belly button had a superpower, like you could press your belly button and something would happen, what would you want that to be?
I feel like, I've my superpower to open up in everybody, like deep curiosity.
That would be pretty magical.
Stay curious. And that's when you put your cape on that dad gave you.
Yeah, thank you. That's it.
So my question is, if you could go back to your teenage self, what would you say?
Oh. Just take it easy. Everything's okay. Yeah. Just gentle on yourself. Yeah, you don't need to prove anything to anybody. Like you are enough. Yeah.
More gentleness. We're working on what ending questions we want to have, but one that I was thinking of today is if you had one wish for birthing people everywhere that could be manifested, what would that wish be? Like, what is your wish for all the women in the world birthing right now?
I guess I wish that there were two that came. But I think that the deeper wish is that for everyone to know that they're absolutely equal to the enormity of their experience.
Wow.
And the first thing that flashed is kind of more of like a beef of mine, which is how, which is how, like what it goes back to the question of like, how do birthing women know what they're choosing when they make a plan for themselves? And that is coupled with how midwives represent themselves and misrepresent themselves. And the initial wish was like, I wish that midwives would know themselves well, represent themselves honestly, so that women could have true choices and not in the middle of their most vulnerable open moments be violated. When they thought they had planned so well. Yeah.
So insidious.
Yeah, so insidious.
Yeah. Well, that was so much wisdom, Ella. Thank you so much for sharing about being able to meet the immensity of your experience. I feel like that will stay with me. So thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah. Well, so nice to see you all and have this conversation. Okay.
Thanks everybody for listening. You can find us at Born Wild Podcast on Instagram. For inquiries or feedback, you can email us at bornwildpodcast@gmail.com. You can find me, Ellah Ray, on Instagram at Ellah Ray, REA. Sophia at sophiabirth.com.
And me, Leah, at Bay Area Home Birth.
We would really appreciate it if you would rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps us reach more people. And as always, stay wild.